Thank you for coming and discussing that with us, and thank you for joining us today. Also, what the EU is writing about its own project, it says the EU's Global Gateway Strategy is on track to deliver on that target, and the target I've just read out to you. What do you think, Mr. Duns, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, if not, please correct me. Are you on track? Where on the track are you?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And I mean, first of all, my regrets not to be with you there. First of all, because the setting looks much more impressive than here in my office, but also because I would have had, if not the opportunity of being there with the State Secretary Brantner, whom I know well, and with Teddy, of course. So, but the agenda is really impressive, and I must say many thanks to BDI, with whom I've had a number of contacts already on the Global Gateway, and that's very good because we cannot do it without the likes of BDI. Are we on track? Honestly, I think we are. It's of course a very tall order, as you have said, but I think that first of all, the understanding in broad circles that in the times we live in, geopolitics, geoeconomics, and the international partnerships that our partners want from us, that these align, that understanding is really there. And that's in itself quite a shift. But when we talk to partners, it's very clear that just as we in Europe look at strategic autonomy, at diversification of supply chains, at de-risking, at building our economic resilience, our partners, whether they're in Latin America, in Africa, in Central Asia, in Southeast Asia, are doing exactly the same. And so there is very clearly space. If you look at it from the perspective of Venn diagrams, there is absolutely space where the interests of our partners and ours, where they match. And that's the space Global Gateway wants to occupy. We definitely have the capacity and the firepower to do so if we act as Team Europe. And Team Europe is a very broad team. It's composed of us here in Brussels, the EU institutions, plus our member states. It works with our development finance institutions, KfW, the DEG, IFD, EIB, EBRD, and so on. It works with the private sector, and that's the real critical component of it. And increasingly, we are involving as well the export credit agencies, Euler, Hermes, and so on. And we are focusing them on a number of key priorities. Critical raw materials, the energy transition and the linkages needed, transport connectivity, digital connectivity, and so on. And so if we can get Team Europe to play as a team, and if we really bring to bear all that we can offer in terms of technology transfer, funding, political and policy accompaniment, then absolutely we are in the game, and we will be able to deliver the kind of things that are important for us, that are important for our partner countries, and that ultimately will make not just the geopolitics, but also the geoeconomics work. We will, no doubt, in the space of this discussion, have the opportunity of getting a bit more granular into some of the points I've made.
So when someone says, yes, we can, if, the question is always, can we or can we not? Because you say, basically, the Global Gateway initiative is not, it's not super old, but it's also not born this year. Does that mean if we can act as Team Europe, that we're not able to act as Team Europe right now?
Let me give you a couple of examples. I think what we're building these days with a country like Namibia on green hydrogen and on critical raw materials gives us a flavor of what Team Europe in action, what Global Gateway in action is. We have important, massive, basically, private sector investments of German companies. We have European ports engaging already with the port of Luderitz in Namibia for the future export of green hydrogen. We are investing in capacity building of the Namibian state so that they not only have the know-how, the human resources to run a transformation of society and the economy towards a green economy, but also can design the regulatory frameworks that are needed for that. We are investing in the power systems, the transmission lines, the strategic corridors, and all of this done by Team Europe and its various members. If I look at another example, what we're doing, again, with Africa on vaccine manufacturing, we all know that our partners were absolutely looking at the world and see who is going to help us build vaccine manufacturing capacity on African soil so that when the next pandemic hits us, we are not again at the back of the line. Well, we see out here, again, a number of European companies combined with grant funding, combined with loans of our DFIs, are in a growing number of African countries, Rwanda, Senegal, Ghana, South Africa, are building that capacity on the ground. I could sum up a whole list of projects already where a global gateway is happening as it should be, combining basically private sector investments with public lending and with public grant funding, and all of that packaged in an approach with partner countries that is at the same time policy-driven and with political companions.
I'm definitely going to ask you that because there is a list. I think there's 87 points on that list. There is criticism for that list as well because supposedly there are some initiatives that have been planned before a global gateway, but let's get to that in a minute. I just want to ask you first, did you notice global gateway in the past 2 years, or was it something that maybe happened, but the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative was much stronger and overpowered it all?
No, thank you. Thank you for that. Let me maybe start from where Mr. Kuhn stopped. When he talked about Team Europe, I would probably use a different connotation. For me, for it to work, it has to be Team Europe, and if it is intervention in Africa, it has to be Team Europe and Africa. For it to work, it cannot be unilateral. And to answer your question, I think, and as you rightly said in your introduction, the skeleton is there, but we are up to see what flesh we are going to put on the bone. And this is my perception of where the global gateway is at the moment. We can obviously cite examples of where we are starting to implement, but probably my intervention on this particular aspect would be to take one step backward before we talk about the global gateway, to put it in the right context in Africa, which is the constituency I represent. First of all, EU-Africa relation has been governed by the Lomé Convention, initially, the Cotonou Agreement, the post-Cotonou Agreement. Now, if you're talking about a new partnership with EU, we have to see whether that partnership that we have developed in the context of the Economic Partnership Agreement, is it delivering? That's the first point I want to make. Yeah.
And is it delivering?
Probably Mr. Kuhn can answer that question, but I can say from where I come from, in the COMESA region, many countries are yet to see the benefits of Economic Partnership Agreement. So that, in my opinion, should be the starting point before we start talking about the global gateway. If I may come back to this issue of the global gateway, there are a few caveats that we need to put into context. Let's take the context of the geopolitical context at the moment. Even myself, I have been promoting global value chains, looking east, looking north, looking west. But all of a sudden, whenever there is a problem, we say, oh, Africa is the new El Dorado. That's where we need to invest. But it doesn't work like that anymore. If you are to have a partnership with Africa, a gateway to Africa, I think the partnership should be much more sustainable. Mm-hmm. You have to strengthen institutions in Africa, private sector institutions in Africa. There was a long list that was about international institutions who are going to work on the global gateway. That's fine. But what are you doing in terms of sustainability to support the institution in Africa, in COMESA?
if I understand you correctly, is that they don't do it yet, or not enough at least.
Not enough, in my opinion, not enough is being done. BDI, for example, with whom we work closely at CBC, they are doing the right thing. They are strengthening the institution, the private sector institution in the country. Yesterday we had a lot of discussion and many people came to the conclusion, we have to act local, we have to act regional. What's the point of, for example, having international institutions which are already supported by budget, Germany and others? What's the point of them intervening in Africa when, for example, we have institutions in Africa which can help? That's the second point that I want to make. The third point, I think I heard the minister earlier on talk about agility. Agility rather, I prefer to use the word agility. The question we have to ask ourselves, so many challenges Africa is facing, debt crisis, climate change, disruption in the global value chain. If we are to address these problems, would the global gateway be agile enough to adapt to these changes so quickly? That's where you have other partners coming in. That's where you have China coming in.
Are they more agile than the European Union?
Definitely, in my opinion, because they are able to act more quickly than the EU. That's the question about agility. When you talk about agility for your domestic constituencies, it's already very bureaucratic, I heard, but just imagine the context in Africa, where at the other receiving end, just the bureaucratic procedures that we face in getting projects. So agility is an issue. The other issue, again, for me, if the global gateway is to work, is the question of infrastructure, and infrastructure. That's where the gap is. You don't have to have 20 solutions. That's where we need to put the resources in Africa, in COMESA. Just to give you an example, with our modest resources in the COMESA Business Council, we realized that we cannot look at trade in isolation. And I was very happy to hear many delegates talking about digitalization. We realized that many women in Africa, they cannot trade. They cannot trade not because they can't access goods, because they can't make payments. So we are developing an online payment platform to help women. So that's infrastructure, both soft and hard infrastructure. And then my last point is about, you rightly said, whether I knew about the global gateway, is the issue of communication and coordination. So I think much more needs to be done on that aspect. And I'm very happy that Mr. Kuhn mentioned he's going to work with the private sector. I represent the private sector in the COMESA region. So I do hope to work with you and probably work with your colleagues to have information on the global gateway.
Thank you. You've now heard quite a bit from the receiving end. What do you feel?
You know, I think that, as Kuhn said, we are on the track, but it's not a fast track. So we have to get to the fast track, and I think that is what we need to work on. It goes a bit to what you said in terms of speeding up. I think there has been a momentum over the last couple of months to speed it up, Kuhn. To be, you know, I think it was a bit for a year or more. It was not so fast, and I think we're speeding it up now. And let's see what it is about. We have seen that China has been very strategic in combining geopolitics as a foundation for its economic success. It's a very strategic approach, very smart. I always say, you know, we can applaud them. It's quite impressive. And we have, as soon as we started in our new term as a government, said we need to combine geopolitics and economy much stronger in order to guarantee the future foundations of our economic success. And this kind of strategic thinking is new, not just in Germany, but also in the EU, in many EU member states. It's not our first reflex to say, so, you know, who do we partner with, which companies, how do we go strategically, etc. about it. This is new in Europe. We can say it's a bit late. Probably most of us would agree. But better that we started now, finally. So that is the first point I want to make. Finally, we are doing strategic thinking about bringing together geopolitics and economy. And in that, yes.
May I ask you just one question? Because what I did read is that it's not a mutual understanding that this is the right way, because supposedly within Brussels there are people saying that basically replacing Global Gateway for development, classical development aid, is not the right way.
No, but Global Gateway, and we do this at home here, is the exact attempt to bring together development, trade, and economic funding. So that is the attempt. You also need development funding, because for what you just said, to help developing institutions, etc. So this is the classical part. But the idea of the Global Gateway is to bring it in a smart way together with the private sector, with trade, export credits, etc., and make it a strategic approach. That's how others do it. They go into a country and they say, okay, so what do you need? You have whatever. You have gallium, you have lithium, you have vanadium, whatever. So if I want to use that, what do you need? You need the infrastructure to bring it to a port. You need housing for the people locally. You need training. You need
and
ABC.
Probably a port.
Yeah, probably a port.
Yeah.
So these are the questions that usually we are not so capable of bringing together as an entire package. And that's what we're working on. But it's new for the EU. It's also new for Germany. And I'm glad, Tanja Gönner is a prime example of bringing GIZ and BDI together. So, we're trying to use this as well, to say we do this together. It's a team Germany, it's a team Europe approach. And if I may say, we were the first going to deliver one list as a government with priority projects. Other member states had sent one from the development ministry, one from the foreign ministry, one from the economic ministry. And we had managed to send one to agree as Germany already on a priority list. So in my opinion, it's important to see it as a partnership, to work locally with the actors on the ground, be they private or public, and then bring our private sector in as well. And there is a business advisory council. Right now there are applications ongoing as far as I know. So it's supposed to be set up very soon, and I hope the Commission will listen to it very well.
What do you answer critics who do say, well, the list that you've sent, and the list that's now been given out again, is not really innovative, but it's actually been old projects?
Part of the old projects are good projects which were unable to be financed in the past. So just because there was an idea of working on something doesn't mean it's bad. It's often the case that there were good ideas before and nobody was ready to finance them or to go in and make the connections. So I think to say we just have to start from scratch and there have been no good ideas in the past, for me, this wouldn't be a good approach. There have been many good ideas in the room. So it needs to be a right balance between existing projects that you also can start financing right on, because if you start from scratch, then you maybe, it gets off the ground in a couple of years. So take those in the pipeline that make sense, make them better in a coherent approach, provide better funding. And I think on the European level, we have to be frank, the European Investment Bank needs to play a much larger role. I think we have a real deficit there. The EBRD is great in the countries they can act. EIB is far from that. So we need better financing conditions for our companies. We need to make it more coherent. But for me, the criterion is not, has the project already been developed in the past, but is it a good project?
When it comes down to, let's say, that initiative, which is competing, and it's set up to be competing with the Belt and Road Initiative, do you feel like this is an equal race that we're running? Maybe you answer?
We're catching up, basically. Look, let's be honest, we're catching up on so many areas when it comes to economic security. We're catching up. Are we already there? No, it's a race. Are we good enough? I think we have all the potential. Look at you in the room. Many of you are active. So I'm confident we can make it. But yeah, it's a catch-up race.
What do you feel? I mean, you said China is definitely more present. China does come in. You said it. They're more agile. They're faster. They're also way quicker, easier to give out money, to hand out money, which actually now has a trickle-down effect on themselves because some of the credits can't be paid back. And obviously for China, that is also a problem. But still, if you had, and I know it's a hard question in front of this audience, but if you have the chance to speak to a Chinese investor, probably state-sponsored, or European Union, what would be easier for you to deal with?
Well, as you said, China is basically intervening more on some, let's say, concrete infrastructure, and obviously money is not an issue for them. They're pumping money, and as you rightly said, also come with it some conditions. Debt problems in Africa, which get worse with China. But what I would say from my perspective, I'm going to be very honest with you, I think COMESA, Africa countries, have been traditionally dealing with Europe, has been a privileged partner with Europe. If you ask me my honest opinion, definitely I think it will be easier for us to work with the EU, given our traditional ties, our legal and parliamentarian system that we have. It will be easier for us to work with Europe as opposed to China. But look, there is also a question of pragmatism. Whenever you face problem, whether you face difficulties, you take the first one which comes. Yeah, if you need to build an airport and well, it takes 5 years on one side, it takes 1 year on the other side. Not difficult question to make.
And
so it's a question of
sometimes even quick when it comes to airports.
Yeah, so so that's the
You
choice
don't have
you make.
such a good track record on that, so,
So that's
you can't blame the EU for that.
So that's the choice you have to make.
Yeah.
Somehow I'm tempted to say it's a good problem to have if you have multiple partners to choose from, which one is going to give you the best solutions. But also we have to be mindful of the conditions which are attached to them. And I think that's something not to be neglected, in my opinion.
Very good that you say the conditions, because also, I mean, now we have been the Chinese-German talks today, the consultation, and what has coming out today already is that both countries do want to invest more in saving the climate and doing more. Nevertheless, in the past, we have to say China was not super active when it came down to building infrastructure in countries where there was really sustainable or where they tried to be CO negative or whatever. Is that something that you, especially because you said the climate crisis, obviously one of the biggest problems in Africa, is that something that you would be looking at more nowadays?
Yes, definitely. For those of you who know Africa, who've been working in Africa, you take the example of South Africa. COMESA, we do not cover South Africa, by the way. The country at the moment, they face a situation of load shedding. There's literally 5 hours of electricity per day. Just imagine the impact on competition.
I've been to South Africa last year. I noticed.
Yeah, so you notice that the problem that they're having. Now imagine the impact on the industries, the competitiveness of the industries there. We had similar problem in Zambia. So definitely that's something we are really looking forward. What are the potential for renewable energy in the COMESA region, alternative sources of energy. Myself with BDI, we have started to work and look at some potential stakeholders, for example, on green hydrogen, and that's something we are keen to explore. We are not saying we are going to adapt it, but we are keen to explore new areas. And also we are keen to work with the European Union. They are coming forward with a project on circular economy. So we are keen, if they wish to work with the private sector and the business community in the COMESA region, we are keen to work with them on the circular economy. Yes, definitely, this is something we are ready to embrace. Myself, as a COMESA Business Council, I've taken the engagement to work more on every issues having to do with addressing climate change. And I'm very much looking forward to it, and I think that's the future where COMESA will be heading.
Mr. Dund, when you hear this, is that something, because we also said, like, where are we going to get the ideas from to what Global Gateway could be potentially to fill out the 300 billion euro investment? Are you and your team and your staff, obviously, do you go to Africa and other countries to see what's actually needed on the ground to then make that a project?
Well, thanks a lot. Of course we do, and I'll pick up on a few points that Teddy and Franziska has made, but maybe to start with that one. Actually, 2/3 of my staff are on the ground. I mean, the DG I run, 1/3 of the staff is in headquarters, and 2/3 are on the ground. most EU delegations, EU embassies on the ground, I mean, the biggest number of staff in those delegations are actually staff for the DG International Partnerships. Because since a long time, we design what we do, we set the priorities together with our partners. Now, as Teddy said, and it's a very important one. You know, if you look at the big figures, Europe, we are by far the biggest trading partner of Africa. If you look at the foreign direct investment stock, Europe is 3-4 times bigger than China, let alone the United States. If you look at official development aid, so the grant funding we provide, we are by far the biggest. And yet, African partners, and notably African citizens, they don't know. And why is that? Precisely because to a certain extent, we have been disconnected. We've done trade, and then we've done investment, and then we've done aid and development policy. And by not connecting these dots, basically you work in silos. Whereas when you connect them, 1 + 1 + 1 is not 3. 1 + 1 + 1 becomes at least 4. And that's exactly what we're doing. Now, we combine that with the fact that we have been in the past, precisely therefore, been doing a lot of intangibles. We've done budget support operations. We have supported steady. I mean, if I look at the amount of money over the past cycles under European Development Fund 11-10, we have actually funded the regional economic communities, East African Community, COMESA, SADC, and so on, with core funding. I mean, these are important amounts, but they're not visible. Why? Because this was pure core funding and not linked to tangible projects. And therefore, the return of what we do to funding hard infrastructure is absolutely fundamental. And so, as Teddy said, this is a real need in Africa. Well, we are going to be there, and we do that together with our private companies. That is linked up with a very solid dialogue on the ground, not just with partner governments, but with partner business associations. I mean, COMESA is based in Lusaka, in Zambia. We had a few months ago a business forum in Lusaka. We are multiplying the number of business fora, Europe with an African country on African soil. We're not doing that in Brussels or in Paris. We're doing it in the countries, and we see how European companies go there. They are interested, and if we can join that up with a loan agenda of our DFIs and with a grant agenda of the development finance institutions and the agencies, then we are really playing. Final comment, agility versus sustainability. There is, of course, a trade-off, and you can't have your cake and eat it. And we know that we need to be faster. I think Franziska has said it as well. There is an awareness that we need to be faster, but we cannot be fast at the expense of sustainability, because we fundamentally think that the kind of co-investments we do with African partners need to stand the test of time. They need to be future-proof. And that has consequences. It means that the impact assessments we do are serious, environmental, social, but also economic. We will not build a railway that ultimately does not pay itself back and therefore creates a fiscal hangover. So we will look at this in a sustainable way. That takes time. I mean, we all know that infrastructure building in Europe takes time. So it takes time in Europe, it takes time in Africa. But I think that the results of it will stand the test of time. And so there's a trade-off to be made. I don't think we want to sacrifice sustainability, but obviously we will do all we can to be faster than we have been in the past.
If I may add, because Teddy, what you have been saying, I think the major shift that we are hopefully able to do with Global Gateway is that it's not about we help African countries. It's not that we help us, but it's that we have mutual interests. You have interests in not just, for example, exporting your raw materials to China, where they are processed and then come to Europe. We have interests not to get all our processed raw materials from China, but to have refining outside of China. So there's a joint interest, yeah, between many countries there, or Latin America and European countries. And now the question is, how can we bring them together with private sector actors? Because there's money in that sector, it's not charity. How can we bring together the infrastructure needed for that? How can we help with training, with skills, and funding? And this is a new approach. It's not about we help you, but it's about our mutual interests in this more complex geopolitical world. And I think that is the new approach, and I hope it will work. And then we line it up with trade, so that our trade agreements actually do facilitate, for example, refining in some African countries, in Latin America. Because usually our trade agreements were countering, were in opposition to those goals. So we are aligning trade agreements, financing tools, our aid policies, plus our support to companies. It's new. I hope it will work. We do everything we can. And I'm very much looking forward to many of you participating in this, because in the end, it's not charity, there's profits to be made. There are many wonderful countries out there, teddies, and I hope we will be able to catch up and create the foundations for our future wealth. Thank you.
That could be perfect last words. I still want to add one question, just because I was curious. In Europe, we do speak a lot about de-risking. It was called decoupling a while ago, and now it's de-risking. Do you talk about de-risking at COMESA?
Yes, definitely. Everything that having to do with promotion of business, promotion of sustainability, this is something we definitely we take into account. But what we also have to take into account, there are more pressing needs that we have to address with regard to debt management, with regard to the disruption in global supply chain, recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. There are also other pressing issues that we have to address. But definitely, some of these issues, we do discuss them, but there will be a time when it become more urgent. At the moment, I think in Africa, in COMESA region, we have some really pressing issues that we have to address. But I do really like your comment about mutual benefits for both Europe, Africa, and COMESA. This is where we need to head, I think, if we are to really make progress.
Perfect. That's now really good last words, and we're going to leave it like that, and there is much more to be seen. I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you, everyone. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you.